able to necessarily use the same sets of packages because not all packages support both Vue 2 and Vue 3. We're not really able to share code without the extra overhead of trying to write and test code that works in both Vue 2 and Vue 3. There will be less infrastructure and configuration overhead for having to manage kind of two different sets of dependencies, two different build systems in both 2 and 3. And then less context switching for developers, right? It's a pain to go from a Vue 2 application and be thinking about things a Vue 2 way, and then go to a Vue 3 application, have to worry about, okay, what changed, and then go back to the Vue 2 application. Like, if everybody's on the same version, if all the applications are on the same version, it's going to be easier to context switch like that. Another big reason is maintainability. As more of the community moves to Vue 3, it'll become a lot harder to find actively maintained packages that are written in Vue 2 and working for Vue 2, right? So we would have to end up forking a lot of packages, doing our own maintenance. Our dev team is just not big enough for that. Plus, as we learned at yesterday's keynote, Vue 2 now has an end-of-life date. It's not going to get any further updates or support coming in. I don't remember what the date was, but in the near future. And then another big reason is, like, as more code is written in our service, it's already been going for 3.5 years. As more code's written, it's just going to get harder and harder to upgrade. So on that note, like, let's talk about scale. So this application that I'm talking about that we migrated has grown organically since 2018. We migrated the service to a monorepo with the rest of our code base in late 2019, which is when this chart starts. You can see the blue line here is the service lines of code, and then the red line is actually the test lines of code. So you can see that they both climb pretty high up to 2,000 lines, pretty close to 2,000 lines of code. We also have over 1,000 Vue components, over 7,000 unit tests, 150 pages with 300 routes. And the application provides dashboards, charts, reports, workflows, and settings for about 1,000 weekly users. And a number that's not on this slide, but there's been about 15 to 20 contributors over time to this service, with about 5 to 6 for any one period of time. Let's talk about kind of what technologies we're using in this app. So out of all these technologies, like, I want you to take a moment to look and guess which ones of these are we not actually using. I'll give you a moment to kind of like look at these and figure out what the icons are. But if y'all got to guess, it's just these ones. These are the only 3 we're not using. So we are using Sass and single file components and mixed JavaScript, TypeScript, and composition API, and render functions. In terms of tooling, we're using a custom Webpack 4 config. We're using a custom Jest config. We're not using Vite. We're not using vtest. It's fully client-side, no server-side rendering at all. We have some third-party packages. The biggest and most notable one is Bootstrap Vue, which we use moderately, not super heavily. And then we have a couple others like Vue Toasted, Vue Portal. Notably, we're not using Nuxt or any other framework of that sort. It's really like mostly built from scratch. So how are we going to migrate a code base that's using all of this different stuff? And the answer is, of course, some of you know where I'm going with this, at vue-compat, which is the compatibility build for Vue. It's a drop-in package for Vue 3, and it adds backwards compatibility for a lot of the breaking changes between Vue 2 and Vue 3. So normally when your components are mounted with Vue, they would just talk directly to it like this. We're running in mode 3. But what vue-compat does is it acts as a kind of intermediary for your Vue 2 components, allowing them to run inside of a Vue 3 application by intercepting and modifying Vue's behavior. But just for those components, you might be wondering what that compat config business is all about. You can actually, one of the awesome features is you can actually opt in and opt out of both the entire compatibility functionality as well as feature by feature, both at an app level and at a component level. So you can have both Vue 2 and more modern Vue 3 components in the same code base. You can even opt to into or out of specific features on a component by component level or at the entire app level. And then each time a deprecated feature is used, Vue will actually emit a warning that you can kind of track and monitor, and so you can see like where all of the places that you still need to fix are. There's a few things that vue-compat doesn't do. It doesn't add back in APIs that were already deprecated in 2.6. So like the old slot scope API, filters are 2 very good examples. It doesn't replace any internal APIs. If you're relying on stuff that was never strictly meant to be public, there's a very good chance that it will break because the internals of Vue have been basically entirely rewritten. And it doesn't support IE11 still. Sorry, IE11. So now that we know how vue-compat works, how are we actually going to use it to upgrade our app? So, we broke this down into 3 phases. So we have a prepare phase where we will prepare the Vue 2 code base. We have an upgrade phase where we'll actually install Vue 3 and get it working. And then lastly, we have a deploy. So let's go through prepare first. The goal of the prepare phase is to remove as many obstacles as possible while still on Vue 2. So each of these changes, you should really merge them into your master branch, put them through your normal checks, deploy them to production. You want to do as much as possible before you actually make the large plunge of upgrading to Vue 3 and trying to get that working, because that's going to be a massive effort. One of the big first steps in this preparation phase is looking at your dependencies, looking at your third-party packages that you're using. So I've broken them down into 3 groups, which we'll go through now. So the first group, Group A, this is anything that can be pre-migrated in Vue 2. These are things that are going to be cross-compatible with Vue 2 and Vue 3, or things that you can just outright replace that you don't need anymore, or that don't need to be involved with Vue in any way, or that you can write your own wrapper on top of. Some examples from our code base are things like Vue sanitize, which we were using to sanitize some HTML input. You can just replace that with some Lodash functions. Vue clipboard 3, which we're using for copying and pasting to the clipboard. It's compatible with both versions. Or even our friends at Sentry, the Sentry Vue package is cross-compatible between 2 and 3. So these are good examples of things in Group A where you don't really need to worry about them. The next set of packages in Group B, you have to worry about a little bit more. These are packages that have a Vue 3 version, but it's a separate Vue 2 and Vue 3 version. You have a major change upgrade. There's a clear upgrade path. It declares its compat config already and is ready to kind of be used in the compatibility build. It's ready to be used with Vue 3, but you're going to have to kind of make an upgrade to that package after you have already installed Vue 3. You can't do it beforehand. So some examples of this, we have a lot of these in our code base. Some very obvious examples are like Vuex and Vue Router. Both of these have major version upgrades that can't be done on Vue 2. Stuff like Portal Vue, which has a kind of nearly released Vue 3.0, nearly released and mostly undocumented Vue 3.0 version, and Vue Toastification, which we're using for toasts and has a V1 and a V2 that are fairly straightforward to migrate. The last set of packages in Group C are the ones that are going to require vue-compat. And these are the most, this is the most risk that you're going to go through, right? So these packages are either too large or too deeply integrated into your code base to replace outright. They don't have a Vue 3 version. There's no Vue 3 version on the roadmap. There's no drop-in replacement either. So it's going to be hard for you to replace these packages, and they aren't going to support Vue 3 natively. It's hard to know if these are going to work without just installing Vue 3 and hoping. So that's why you want to minimize stuff in Group C. Stuff in Group A or B is much safer, and stuff in Group A is, of course, the best. An example of this is Bootstrap Vue for now, and I'll get a little bit more into why that's a for now later. So I'd like to introduce you to your new best friend for doing this preparation phase, which is, of course, ESLint. ESLint Vue is going to be your new best friend. So ESLint plugin Vue comes with rules to detect many of the Vue 3 deprecations that are breaking changes that are not going to work in Vue 3. And a lot of these rules, you can actually enable them while still on Vue 2 and replace them with things that work in both Vue 2 and Vue 3. You can fix them one by one rule at a time, and you can prevent the code base from regressing while your coworkers are still working on their features and their code and doing what they're doing, right? So you can enable these rules, fix all the issues, commit it to master. Now nobody else can make any more violations of these rules, and you don't have to worry about these things anymore. So it streamlines the process greatly. And let's talk about a couple of places, a couple of examples where this can help. So you want to focus on replacing things which are not supported in Vue 3, even with the compatibility build. One example is filters, right? Filters are no longer supported in Vue 3. You can replace them with a globally registered service. This is a fairly easy thing to find and do kind of like a mostly global, or find and replace here. Another good example is the old slot scope syntax on the Vue 2.5 syntax to the new modern slot scope syntax. vslot syntax. Combined VIFs and V4s. In Vue 3, the precedence here changed. So instead of the VIF coming after the V4, it comes before the V4. You can replace almost all of these with a computed property, which works the same in both versions. Another place that we chose to do ahead of time is declare all of our component event emits up front. So in Vue 3, you have to declare all of your events like you declare your props. You declare data going in, you declare data going out. So this option doesn't have any use in Vue 2 at all, but you can still enable an ESLint rule for it. You can still kind of pre-do a lot of these changes. And ESLint plugin Vue has rules for all of these. Some of them are auto-fixable. Some of them are fixable with suggestions. So ESLint plugin Vue is really going to be your best friend here. Another thing is don't forget about tests. If you're using Vue test utils or something built on top of Vue test utils, it will need to go through a major version bump as well. VTU 1 only supports Vue 2, and VTU 2 only supports Vue 3. And there's a number of breaking changes between VTU 1 and VTU 2. I'm not going to go through all of them. They're in the documentation. But you want to make sure that you're doing the same process of preparation for your test code as well. If you remember from our slide at the beginning or near the beginning, we had almost one-to-one service code versus test code. So now that you are kind of mostly through the preparation phase and you're ready to upgrade, now that you've prepared your Vue 2 code base, we can move into actually upgrading it to Vue 3. So a little bit about our process here. We chose to do this upgrade on a feature branch, which means that we created a separate Vue 3 branch off of master. And we developed on it parallel to master with regular back merges of master into our feature branch. When you do this, every time that you back merge master into your branch, you have to review all of that code that went into master that's new for anything that you have already changed or fixed, for anything that's not compatible in Vue 2, or that's not compatible in Vue 3. And that's why the preparation is so important, and the ESLint rules to prevent regressions are so important, because you want to minimize the amount of time that you spend doing that. The longer that you have this preview or this feature branch open for, the more back merges you're going to have to do, the more chances there are for code to kind of sneak in. So we want this phase to take as little time as possible to minimize that overhead and minimize that risk. So the first thing we have to do is install vue-compat. You install a few packages. The migration guide for Vue 3 has guides for both Vite and Vue CLI and custom Webpack. So install it according to the guide for your particular tool. The first thing you want to do is just focus on fixing compiler errors. Make sure that you just get something running. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't matter if it's really working or not, but get it compiling, get something shipped to the browser so you can see what you're working with. You may need to disable type checking temporarily if you're using a build-based type checking system. Ignore any compiler warnings. Just focus on the things that are stopping you from getting something running. You'll probably need to upgrade Vuex and VueRouter as well very early on. Vuex is very straightforward. There's very little changes between version 3 and version 4, but VueRouter 4 comes with its own handful of breaking changes. So do basically as little as possible to get something working. Another note, if you're using custom Webpack config, you're going to run into some other weird problems. One example is I couldn't get VueLoader to compile my TypeScript components. It was not processing them through TypeScript correctly, and I had to add like a dummy test.ts to my ts include, or my ts config file. So like stuff like that. If you're using something like Vue CLI or Vite, most of this is going to be managed for you. So if it makes sense for your project, you might consider doing an upgrade of your build tools there before you actually get to this phase. So once I had done this, once I had got something running, I opened my browser and I had my login page, and I was like, okay, cool, this actually looks exactly like what it's supposed to look like. So I typed in my email, I hit sign in, and I got this, and I was like, wow. This is awesome. And you're like, Alex, what do you mean? There's nothing there. Yeah, I don't have to fix auth. Like, this is incredible. People can log in. I didn't have to fix auth at all. Like, that was kind of one of my biggest concerns is not being able to log into my app, having issues with the login flow. Like, I didn't have to do anything at all, and it worked. Like, that was a great sign for me. So the first thing you want to do after you have gotten something running is get your support working. Re-enable your type checking. If you were using build-based checking, you might want to consider switching to something more modern like Vue-TSC that does command-based type checking that you can include in your CI/CD. Get your test harness working, right? Don't try to fix all of your tests up front if you have 7,000 unit tests. But get them at least running, get to the point where you can have the opportunity to fix them as you're working on more things. And upgrade ESLint to the Vue 3 rule set. You may have to tweak some rules to change certain deprecations to a warn in the compatibility build. It'll say things like, oh, $listeners is not supported. Great, the compatibility build is patching it. I can turn that one into a warning. I did not do all of this right away, and I regretted it. There were so many, I'll get more into it later, but like there were so many tests especially where I came in later and I was like, I could have fixed so many of these along the way. Especially like, I still haven't even re-enabled type checking. So you're gonna go through this cycle for a while after this. The cycle of detect issues, fix the issues, update your tests, repeat. I'll talk a little bit about each of these phases. So for detection, you have a lot of different options. You have Sentry, of course, which we were using pretty actively at Productive. You have automated testing, right? Like run all of your automated tests, your integration tests, your end-to-end tests, and see where they're actually failing. And your manual testing, right? Like you just like, obviously like when I showed the screenshot of my app before, like there's nothing there. So, it's a very obvious place to start. And then you're gonna wanna fix these issues. This is where you're gonna find out things like, when you remember the package slide from earlier, your packages in group B that have to be upgraded after you install Vue, this is where you're gonna have to probably do those upgrades. Your packages in group C that you're gonna have to just kind of hope are working, this is where you're gonna find out if they actually work or if you're gonna have to do some other major effort. This is also where you're gonna get really familiar with the debugger. You're gonna have to get really familiar with the console, start to, like I found myself debugging Vue code all the time because I was just like, man, like I don't understand why this thing is not working. I had to look at my compiled templates. Like you're just gonna have to get very familiar with the debugger. And don't get discouraged here. Like you'll find places where one change can fix a bunch of issues. An example here is like I had spacing issues all over the app. And it turns out that it's because the white space handling between Vue 2 and Vue 3 changes. So Vue 3 by default, it strips out all of the extra white space in your templates. And so I was able to change that back to the old behavior and fix a bunch of spacing issues. You're also gonna find places like where the intern built a big old form and a backend engineer approved it, and it was only working because it was modifying store data in event handlers. It's like, that's not gonna work anymore. It never should have worked. You're just gonna have to fix it. And update your tests as you find and fix these issues, right? You're gonna have to rewrite code. You're gonna have to change the way things are mocked. You're gonna have to change things are imported in some cases, right? Like, update your tests as you're doing this so that you don't have to do it all at the end. And even better, write new tests that are gonna catch this the next time we have an upgrade like this, like when we get to Vue 4, which is Vue 3 to Electric Boogaloo. While you're iterating on this cycle, you're probably gonna find places where you need to make additional changes, like rewriting code or things like that. Make them against master when you can. Just because you have this feature branch, just because you're in the upgrade phase, doesn't mean you can't you can't make changes in master and then backport them to your branch if that makes more sense. Anything that you can merge into master directly is one less thing that you have to worry about breaking in your preview branch or in your feature branch. Once I thought I had mostly everything working, I scheduled a bug bash with each of our 4 feature teams. I invited all the engineers, I invited all the team leads to each one, and we just kind of spent time looking at this preview branch, which we had deployed to dev, and looking for any issues with their features. And each of them found plenty of new things, stuff that I would not even have known was not working because I did not know how most of these features worked. So that was a really valuable thing. They found a ton of issues. I got a little bit discouraged, but like I said, a lot of them I was able to fix with 1 or 2 changes. And then I did a takeover in our dev environment one night, and I deployed the branch temporarily to dev. Mostly to check for alarms. Like I wanted to see if our automated end-to-end tests, if any of our other services, I wanted to see if they were gonna alarm or raise some issues in any way. Because if I just merged my code into master, and then there were a bunch of alarms, I need to make sure that I'm there presently to fix those right away, or it's gonna block deployment. There's probably gonna be issues. I might have to revert my whole PR. You don't wanna revert a massive PR. It is a pain for everybody, most of all yourself. So I did find a few issues when I did this. I found a few things that I would not have found otherwise. So as I went through more of the cycles in the previous slide, I started to notice some patterns that tended to be a little bit of fragile and at risk of explosion. So one of these first examples here is changes in the composition API. If you're using the composition API plugin for Vue 2, it works a little bit differently than the one in Vue 3. There are some extra parameters like root and refs, which you get in the context argument. The root one is, I don't think, even documented, but we were using it anyway. So these things are going to explode. You'll have to, this is just kind of part of your normal migration process, but be aware for things like this. Pay special attention to anything using vue.extend or new view, because that stuff is going to be, in and of itself, it doesn't necessarily not work. An example I have here is this use modal function, which allowed us to kind of imperatively open a modal. This code itself, I think, works, but we were doing a lot of other things around this in terms of like how we mounted it actually and how we unmounted it, how we registered some event handlers. Altogether, it meant that our modal stuff did not work, and that, in fact, pretty much anywhere we were using vue.extend or new view, or in this case, new modal ctor, which is an aliased version of new view. Most of that stuff is probably going to need to change, or at least you're going to need to pay special attention to it. Another thing is, I found that the behavior of scoped slots.default actually changed between Vue 2 and Vue 3. I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, but it was something that affected a lot of our application. Scoped slots, of course, doesn't exist anymore in Vue 3, but in Vue 2, you could call scoped slots.default as if it was a function. Even if the consuming component wasn't consuming a slot scope, right? So it didn't consume any arguments off of the default slot. Whereas in Vue 3, this is only a function in the compatibility build, and B, if your component, the component providing you content or the component that's rendering content into your slot is actually consuming slot props. So there's a lot of places where that were crashing because they were calling this with no arguments. Okay, what about those 7,000 unit tests? I keep telling you that I had a huge problem with unit tests. If you're using a wrapper around VTU2, like testing library / view or custom mount utility, you might be able to patch up a lot of the changes in there, right? And the thing I forgot to say is, right, there's a bunch of changes between VTU1 and VTU2. Mount options changed. Wrapper methods got removed. Wrapper arrays, or when you use find all components, it's just a normal array, right? So if you're using a custom utility or a wrapper, a lot of the changes might be handled in there. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Another thing that we found was this library by Xanaf called vue-test-utils-compat, which is basically exactly like vue-compat, but for vue-test-utils. It has the same type of feature flag-based setup where you can enable and disable particular feature flags, although only globally and not at a test per test level. And it shims kind of the entire VTU library and kind of provides a bunch of backwards compatibility for things that were removed, which is super cool. It was actually written for Xanaf's Bootstrap Vue migration, which he opened in January and has kind of been in progress for a little bit now. Unfortunately, Xanaf was affected by the situation in Ukraine, so it's been delayed for some time. But I actually just checked his PR yesterday, and he's alive and well. He commented 2 days ago with a status update. So he's getting quite close to finishing. If Bootstrap Vue is something that you're using heavily, go try this branch out and help him test it and see if you can find any bugs. You can also use ESLint. So I actually use this more heavily for the V1 deprecations as opposed to the V2 changes. But nothing actually existed for linting Vue test utils, which I thought was very much a shame. You have stuff like ESLint plugin Jest for linting your Jest tests. You have stuff like ESLint plugin Cypress, at least I think. So I actually wrote one of my own. I wrote my own ESLint plugin for Vue test utils. And I really wanted to have it open sourced by the time of this conference, but it's one of those things. Wrote it on company time, company property. I'm waiting for a final approval from legal to get that open sourced. But hopefully by the end of next week, that should be open for anybody to use. And it has rules in it, not just for deprecations and migrations, but also just best practices around VTU. So hopefully that'll be open sourced very soon. So after installing all this compatibility stuff, fixing all these deprecations, all right, let's try to find out where I'm at. Oh no, that's a lot of test failures. That's it's not even running all my tests. I have 6,641 total. I know I have 7,300 tests, right? So this is like 40% failures, which is not great. This is a lot. This is going to be a pain. This is going to be a pain. So I found out that you can pass a store when in mounting. In Vue test utils 1, you can do a mount function like this that passes a store directly in the mount options. This is something that works, and it's how we were always passing our stores to our mounts. But it's not actually something that's handled by vue-compat. So I tweaked the code a little bit to have it handle that store option, and I got down to like 1,400 failures. So like that's great. I got half of them down. That's still a lot of test failures. So this is where I'm saying, like, you really got to start on this early. You really can't leave this to the end. I did find some stuff. I needed to add like some vue-compat support to VTU, which I contributed back to the library, and I think is merged, just waiting for release. I had to remove I had to disable unhandled promise rejections in my test command because Vue 3 is a lot happier to reject promises than Vue 2 was. So lots of entire test suites were failing, and that's why some of the tests are actually missing, is because when the entire test suite process crashes, then Jest just doesn't report any of those tests. I had to remove a lot of unnecessary plugin installations, things like installing the Vue composition API into all my local views, installing Vuex. These are things that like were causing some tests to fail. But even after fixing a lot of those systemic issues, I had nearly 1,000 tests and 250 test suites that were failing, right? And so that was not fun. There was some patterns that we found here in terms of what changed and what we had to kind of fix up manually and what these 1,000 failures were. One of them is ref assertion differences. If you do an expect on a computed property, you expect it to equal some ref. This works in Vue 2 with the composition API plugin. It does not work in Vue 3 or VTU 2 because the actual like structures of these things are quite different. There are a couple easy fixes. You can unref the value before you assert it. You can expect that just on the value prop, depending on exactly what you want to do. So there's like some easy solutions there, but you have to kind of figure out what the issue is and fix it yourself. Another example is the way that stubbing, shallow mounting components with slots works. In VTU 1, it rendered all slots by default. In VTU 2, it does not. So if we have a simple test component like this, and we mount it and expect it to match the snapshot, this will actually fail because there's not going to be anything in that default. It's going to be completely stubbed out. There's not going to be any hello world inside our button. Obviously, this is not a very useful test, but it's a good example. Like you will have to, there is an option to have it render the default slot by default, but it will never automatically render other named slots. So I had to create a utility to do that that could automatically kind of stub out these slots. I also did some team group fixing for to actually go through these and fix them all together, which has helped for information, like socializing the changes as well as like getting them done faster. So now that you're done with the upgrade, you're ready to deploy. If you have the ability to A/B test, I would seriously recommend you do it with a migration this big. You are going to have some problems. You are going to break something for someone, and you're not going to find it. And that's just the way it's going to be, no matter how good your test suite is. So, and there's also going to be a long tail of working with the teams to detect and fix and remove those deprecation warnings and slowly migrate off of the compatibility build. But at least you're on Vue 3, assuming you don't have to roll back. Be ready to roll back. Be ready to even revert your merge if you have to. Have a contingency plan for that. But assuming you get everything done and deployed, congratulations. You're on Vue 3. You hopefully didn't break production. All right, let's do some stats and some takeaways. So the time it took me to do this, I was mostly doing it on my own. I had my coworkers help me with a lot of the code review. Like I said, I did some group stuff. But the prepare phase took me about 2 weeks, including the time to like write the ESLint plugin and fix a lot of the tests. And the upgrade itself took close to 4 weeks with all of the fixing I had to do and all of the changes I had to make. The diff size for the final PR was close to 11,000 lines. And the number of PRs was about 30 in the prepare phase and about 40 that went into the feature branch. So a couple of things that you can do if you're part of the community and you're trying to help people out with migrations like this. If you're a library author, test your library with a compatibility build. Even if you don't plan to upgrade to Vue 3, install it in a Vue 3 compat build or vue-compat set up and test it to see if it works, right? So at least you can put in your README, hey, I work under vue-compat, I need these compat flags, I put them in my library or whatever. And set your components compat config. If you're a Vue 3 library, you can just put compat config mode 3 in all of your components, and it should work under the compatibility build. If it doesn't, then people are going to try to use your library under Vue 3 with a compatibility build. It's going to crash because it's running in Vue 2 mode. That's it. So thanks for coming to my talk. Thanks to my coworkers, Andrew and Karen, for their feedback while writing it. If you want to get in touch, I have my GitHub, my LinkedIn. Productive is hiring front-end engineers, so if you want to learn more about what we're doing, what we're building, join the team, see what we're looking for. I've got a link to my careers page here, productive.com/careers. You can come and find me after the show. And I got some resources here, including a link to the slides, bit.ly/slides-vueconf2022. But yeah, thank you very much.
Guys, give a big round of applause for Alex. If you didn't know that was his first talk, would you have believed me? No? Alex, well done. You did an incredibly good job. So for your first talk in front of people, well done.
Thank you.
Good job. All right. Guys, we're running a little bit over. But if you, and I know this is a very big topic, moving from Vue 2 to V3, so I'll take 2 burning questions. Who has a burning question? Put your hand up. Or was that so comprehensive there is nothing else required? Oh, why did it have to be the guy all the way at the back? Oh, geez, all right.
Come and meet
I'm
him.
gonna die. Keep your hand up. Keep your hand up. No, I didn't think so. I'm built to be a courteous person. We come to you. I'm almost there. No, I'm fine.
Like a tenth of the way. So I got the sense, looking at this presentation, that the majority of the effort is almost more on the testing side.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I think that I probably spent more effort and more time fixing the tests and making sure that all my tests work than actually doing the migration. The compatibility build itself works great. Most of the issues that I have, I was able to fix pretty quickly, but the tests were actually really the significant effort. And I've spent like the last week and a half just fixing tests.
Fantastic. Isn't it lucky we have a talk about testing a little bit later? There was one more question just at the front here. Put your hand up again. Oh, over there. It's always opposite to where I am. Damn, these big conference halls. No, sure I can. Just keep it clean.
Sure, definitely I will. Hi all. So you mentioned for Bootstrap Vue, you're using the compat branch. Are you still using that in the prod environment?
We actually didn't have to use that branch itself. The tips in that PR were enough to get it working. We weren't using a lot of the Bootstrap Vue components and features. I think if we were using more of it, we would probably have to try to use that branch. But we didn't have to actually use it ourselves. The stuff that we were using worked OK with the compatibility build with a couple of patches that were in the PR that I had to apply.
Alex, thank you so much. Let's give him a last